The first time I caught the night bus was pure chance. I'd heard the legends, of course. We all had. Urban legends are a big thing where I live. I suspect it's partly because I hail from an unremarkable and, frankly, dull city that has little else going for it. Kids growing up around here don't have much to do, and so their imaginations tend to run wild, with escapism being all the rage. My friends and I were obsessed with urban legends during our formative years, gobbling up the tales whispered in the playgrounds, and later put up to view on anonymous forums. We found the legends both frightening and exhilarating, bringing excitement to our otherwise boring lives. It would be fair to say that I was quite naive back then. Some of my friends were more cynical, but I truly believed them all. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Spencer Street, the South Side Troll Man, and the White Lady of Croft Manor were a few of my favorites. My friends and I took on the role of amateur sleuths, investigating every site and searching for any evidence of these legendary cryptids and otherworldly entities. To my extreme disappointment, we found nothing. No ghosts or ghouls, no monsters, and no signs of anything out of the ordinary. Eventually, I too became cynical, concluding that all legends were just childish nonsense, and I was wasting my time pursuing them. The last bus was another of the local myths that we'd heard growing up, and I'd assumed it was bullshit like all the others. But now I know better. Officially, the last bus out of the city center leaves at 1:45 from the bus depot in High Street. That's the bus which sensible people catch if they want to go home safely after a night out on the town. The bars and clubs close at 1 a.m., and the crowds of drunken revelers pile onto the streets, fighting over taxis, queuing up for late-night kebabs, attempting a last-minute hookup, or calling up friends in search for an all-night house party. It's the same chaotic scene every Friday and Saturday night. Usually, there are a couple of punch-ups and a few people who will injure themselves by falling over drunk on the pavement. It's all depressingly predictable. The police will be called out, as will the ambulance crews, and eventually the crowds will disperse, as an eerie silence returns to the darkened streets. Then we enter the twilight hours when all sensible and law-abiding citizens are at home, safely tucked up in their beds. After hours, the streets are left to the vulnerable, like the homeless with nowhere else to go, forced to seek shelter in shop door fronts, wrapping their cold bodies in old sleeping bags and praying that they make it through the night. And then there are the bad ones. The ones that your mother warns you about. The gangs of thugs who patrol the streets, their blood up as they search for a victim to violently attack. And the predatory men who lurk in the shadows, waiting for vulnerable women who they can prey upon. On a Monday morning, you'll read the stories in the local newspapers. The homeless man beaten to a pulp, the young girl abused in a back alley. Police will open up investigations and appeal for witnesses. Sometimes they'll catch the perpetrators. Other times they won't. You'll have sympathy for the victims, but secretly feel relieved that it didn't happen to you or somebody you know. But in these cases, the culprits are human monsters, made of flesh and bone, and not the otherworldly fiends I tried to chase. During my cynical years, I believed that these human monsters were the worst things out there, that they owned the twilight hours before the dawn. But I was wrong. And now I know the truth. There are far worse things that lurk in the shadows. The first occasion I caught the night bus came during a difficult time for me. I'd just turned 21 and had split up with my partner of 2 years. Looking back, I now see how the breakup was the best thing for both of us. But at the time, I was devastated and so angry. My friends had taken me for a night out in the town in the hope it would cheer me up. A nice idea. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. I drank way too much, starting on the beers and moving on to shots of hard liquor. We went to a club where I made several embarrassing and unsuccessful attempts to hook up. As if that wasn't bad enough, I then started a fight with my best friend, throwing a punch at him before I got thrown out of the club by the bouncers, and foolishly decided to walk the streets alone in a drunken stupor. Somehow, I managed to avoid getting beaten up or falling on my face and cracking my head open on the pavement. Instead, I managed to stagger to a bus shelter, not realizing in my inebriated state that the official bus service had finished for the night, and there wouldn't be another one due until morning. I remember laying down to rest on the bench, and I must have passed out, because I woke up several hours later, and the streets were empty. I was all alone. Or so I thought. My heart almost jumped out of my chest when I saw the old bus driving down the street towards me, emitting black smoke from its exhaust pipe as it came, its noisy engine interrupting the previous quiet. The vehicle was partially illuminated by the streetlights, although I noted with some concern how the lamps flickered as the bus drove by them. The vehicle looked like a throwback from the 1960s, the kind of ancient tin can on wheels you'd expect to see at a classic car show. Unlike the modern vehicles we're used to, those that glide along the street quietly, this old rust bucket rattled along, noisily looking up as if it could break down at any moment, but instead it kept coming, driving down the empty road and coming ever closer to my shelter. I noted how there were no emblems or motifs painted on the side of the bus, and no destination name was shown above its front windscreen. The vehicle's exterior was painted all in black, and even the windows were tinted, meaning I couldn't see who or what was inside. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I recalled the details I'd heard about the last bus legend, one of those I'd read and studied during my youth. The vehicle I was seeing before me matched the description of the coach in the stories, the phantom bus that appears on an abandoned street in the early hours, offering lifts to the weary and needy. I came close to panic in that moment, wondering whether I was dreaming or suffering from a paranoid delusion. I'd spent so much of my youth chasing these legends, searching for any evidence that could prove the existence of something outside of our own reality. But now that the truth was staring me in the face, a big part of me wanted to up and run. But I didn't. I don't know whether I was frozen to the spot with fear, or if my curiosity got the better of me, but I held my ground and waited for the bus to come to me. I stood up on my shaking feet as the bus pulled in beside my shelter, and despite the amount of alcohol I consumed, I suddenly felt quite sober. It seemed to take forever for the vehicle to park up and for the creaking old door to swing open. When it did, I was confronted by a friendly middle-aged man wearing a neat blue uniform while he sat behind the wheel, driving his bus to an unspecified location. He smiled down at me, his eyes twinkling in an amicable and welcoming fashion. Then he opened his mouth and spoke in a soft, almost a fatherly tone of voice, saying, "Good evening, my friend. Are you coming on board?" I'd heard about the enigmatic driver before, but nevertheless, his appearance and whole demeanor took me off guard. I struggled to find the words to respond, stuttering my way through my reply. "Where will it take me?" I inquired nervously. "Home," the driver responded, with a reassuring smile. "I'll take you home, eventually. But life isn't about the destination. It's about the journey. Sometimes you need to take a leap of faith. So, what do you say, my young friend? Will you ride with us?" I'll admit to being scared in that moment, terrified in fact. Somehow I realized how important this was, how the destination I made right then could shape the rest of my life. I didn't know what exactly would await for me if I got on board, but I had a good idea, and it was terrifying. But if I walked away, I would never discover the truth. And so, I took a deep breath, plucked up my courage, and stepped onto the bus, seeing the driver smile as the door shut firmly behind me. When I saw the bus driver up close, I sensed something sinister about him and instantly started regretting my decision. But by then it was too late. This was the first time I rode the night bus. Over the years, I've been on it 3 times in total, living to tell my tale on each occasion. Catching the Phantom bus isn't as easy as you would imagine. There's no set of rules that you can follow, and no set time or location. I don't know whether it's sheer chance or if the bus chooses its passengers. I have, however, been able to piece together some common threads, using both my own experiences and those of others who have made the journey. We have an online forum which we use to tell our stories and exchange information. It's an issue of safety as much as anything else. The night bus can be lethal if you don't keep your wits about you. Having accumulated this knowledge over the last number of years, I will now share it with you here. Once you step on board the bus, you'll see rows of hard-back seats stretching back to the rear of the vehicle's interior. There's nothing unusual about this, at least not at first glance. You'll see other passengers too, but you mustn't engage with them at this point. And don't look them in the eye. And take a seat on an empty bench somewhere towards the front. It doesn't really matter where exactly. They'll come to you in their own time. The journey itself can last for hours, or at least that's what it will seem like when you're on board. You can see out the windows from the inside and look upon the scenery, such as it is. Initially, you'll see familiar sights, city center streets, buildings, and businesses that you'll recognize. Nevertheless, you'll soon realize that something isn't quite right with the scene. The streets will be totally abandoned, with no traffic or pedestrians anywhere to be seen. There won't be any businesses open or lights emanating from anywhere along the road. But the further you drive out from the city center, the more bizarre the sights you will encounter. Soon, the tidy streets and well-maintained buildings will give way to urban decay, crumbling structures and ruins, like those of a lost city forgotten by time. Eventually, the bus will leave the city behind and enter what appears to be a dense forest. The narrow roads you will follow will be shrouded in darkness, with the only illumination coming from the vehicle's bright headlights. If you glance into the woods on either side of the road, you will occasionally catch a glimpse of shadows moving behind the tree line. Strange figures and unidentified animals with glowing red eyes glaring through the darkness. You'll see these unnerving creatures for only the briefest of seconds as the bus drives through, and then they'll be gone. At first you'll think it's just your fertile imagination playing tricks on you. But deep down, you'll know that there is something evil lurking in those woods. By this point in the journey, it should become clear that you're no longer in the realm of the living. I don't know where the bus takes you, but I do know it's not wise to stare out the windows for too long. What lurks out there can drive you mad. And besides, your focus should be on those inside the bus, as they pose the more immediate threat. My fellow online sleuths and I think of the passengers as lost souls. It seems certain that they are no longer part of the world of the living. There's something lacking in them, an important piece that is missing. Once you talk to them, and they will engage with you whether you want them to or not, you'll see the sadness in their empty, dead eyes. They want to latch on to you because you have what they want. Life. That's why it's so important that you follow the rules. Don't let them get inside of your head, whatever you do. There are 6 entities you're likely to encounter once you set foot upon the bus, all of whom have their own unique traits and tricks which they'll attempt to use against you. Based on the shared experiences of our forum members, I have pieced together a description of each one of these otherworldly entities. Firstly, there's the driver, whose physical description I've already covered. The driver's first job is to get you on board. That's why he'll appear so friendly and welcoming, enticing you to take a ride on his bus. But once the doors shut behind you and the bus starts moving, you'll see the driver's smile falter ever so slightly as he breaks eye contact and focuses on the road. And despite this, the driver is a benign figure who plays a small but important role in the events which follow. His job from this point onward is to simply drive, and he does keep his promise to you. He will bring you home eventually, assuming you don't fall foul of any of the spirits during the drive. Like I said, the journey will seem to last for hours, but when he drops you off on your home street back in your realm, no time will have passed whatsoever. He lets you off, smiling once again and saying, "Have a nice evening. Hope to see you again soon." And you'll be left standing on the pavement outside of your home, bewildered and in a state of shocked disbelief as you watch the phantom bus drive down the road, before it inexplicably vanishes at the end of your street. After the driver, the first passenger you're likely to notice is the party girl. This is an attractive young woman who appears to be in her early 20s. Her physical appearance will change on each occasion. Sometimes her hair will be brunette and other times blonde. Likewise, her skin complexion can either be pale or dark, depending upon the beholder. What's consistent is how she's made up and dressed, donning a cocktail dress and high heels, and carrying a designer handbag. Her fragrance is sweet and enticing, but you may also smell a hint of alcohol in her breath. You'll notice how her mascara has run, indicating that she has been crying. Nevertheless, there's something in her deep and expressive eyes which will draw you in, an inner beauty and vulnerability that plays on your emotions. It's worth noting that you will be attracted to the young woman in spite of your gender or usual preferences. You'll be unable to take your eyes off of her and will feel compelled to take a seat close to her. The party girl will engage with you during the early stages of the journey, distracting you from the bizarre sights outside of the bus's windows. At first, she'll be flirtatious and fun, asking you about yourself and talking about her night out. But soon, the conversation will take on a darker tone. She'll tell you about a tragic event from her past, some kind of abuse, a violent ex-partner, or the death of a loved one. The story will vary each time, but will always be one of sadness and suffering. Your heart will go out to her, even if you're not usually an empathetic person. Once she's told you her woeful tale, the girl will ask you to go home with her to give her some comfort. You will be tempted, but under no circumstances should you agree to go with her. It's critical that you remember what she is, and what she really wants from you. My advice is to politely decline her offer without causing her undue suffering. The party girl may be a lost soul, but by all accounts, she still feels human emotions. She won't be angry when you reject her, but instead will sob softly into her hands. You'll feel guilty, but you must move on and switch seats, leaving the poor girl to her misery. The next passenger you'll encounter sits a couple of rows behind the party girl. We call her the OAP, or the pensioner. She's an elderly woman, probably in her 80s. Her hair is in white curls, wearing a shawl and a heavy winter coat, and with a shopping cart on wheels parked underneath her seat. Her face is wrinkled, and the perfume she wears is quite overbearing. But the OAP has kind eyes and a sweet motherly smile. She'll remind you of an elderly relative, like a grandmother or great aunt, and you will feel an affection towards her. A woman of her age and appearance is the last person you'd expect to find riding a night bus during the early hours of the morning. And yet here she is, another lost soul trapped on a journey that never ends. She'll speak with you in a kindly, wholesome fashion, asking about your life and your family, while also entertaining you with anecdotes from her long and interesting life. You truly will feel at ease talking with her, but you mustn't forget what she really is. The conversation will end with the woman asking you to accompany her home to help with her shopping, or something like that. She'll offer to prepare you something to eat, your favorite meal or snack, whatever that might be, and she'll offer to put you up for the night. Again, you'll be tempted, but you must say no. On this occasion, it doesn't actually matter how politely you refuse her offer. Whatever you say or do, She will react with absolute fury, screaming every obscenity under the sun as her face screws up with anger. It's the last thing you would expect from a seemingly sweet old lady, but this is what'll happen. As soon as she launches into her hateful tirade, you should leave your seat and move further down the bus, and you would be wise not to engage with her again for the rest of your journey. The next passenger you'll meet is a scruffy middle-aged man known as the drunkard. He sits close to the back of the bus and is perhaps the type you'd expect to find on a late-night service. I wouldn't recommend sitting too close to him, if only because he smells pretty bad, his breath stinking of alcohol and cigarettes. You'll note how his old clothes are soiled and torn, and his unkempt beard will be badly matted. You probably won't wish to engage with him, but the drunkard will begin a conversation with you regardless, and against your better judgment, you'll get drawn in. He will turn out to be surprisingly intelligent and insightful, seeking to educate you in such matters as religion, philosophy, and scientific theory. He'll tell you a story in the form of a parable or fable, one with a dark twist to it. When I first met the drunk, he recounted to me the tale of the frog and the scorpion, one that demonstrates the cruel and destructive nature of life. Next, he'll remove a silver hip flask from his inside jacket pocket and offer you a drink. Regardless of your alcoholic preferences, you'll be tempted to take a sip. The drink will smell so sweet and inviting, but of course you must refuse him. After you turn down the drink, the drunk will shoot you an angry look before shaking his head and saying, "You're a damn fool, a stupid little child. You have no idea what you're dealing with." This is your cue to move on. Now, you'll notice how the first three passengers are trying to draw you in, using whatever charms or supernatural powers they have at their disposal. Their ultimate goal is to trick you into leaving the bus. Needless to say, you must not do this. Not if you want to make it home. Nobody knows what exactly happens to those who fall into one of their traps. We do know that several members of our forum have vanished without a trace over the years, and my city has a long history of unexplained disappearances. The fourth passenger is different from the rest, however. He's a young male who sits on the back row while listening to headphones linked up to an 80s-style Walkman. We call him Headphones Guy, and it seems that all he does is listen to music, his eyes closed as he taps his foot to the beat. The Headphones Guy will not attempt to engage with you or even acknowledge your presence. That's not to say he isn't dangerous, though. There was a member of our group who had a run-in with the guy, and to be fair, it wasn't unprovoked. Feeling bold, my friend got right up in the passenger's face, waving his hands and clicking his fingers in an attempt to gain the spirit's attention. When this failed, he foolishly grabbed the guy's headphones, physically pulling them off of his head. Predictably, Headphones Guy didn't react well to this violation. In an instant, he jumped up from his chair, lashing out with his fist and knocking his assailant down with one punch. My friend remembers a sharp, intense pain in the back of his head before he blacked out. The next thing he remembers is waking up in his own bed the next morning with a broken nose and a nasty gash on the back of his head. He also found a note in his jeans pocket, crudely written on the back of an old bus ticket in what looked like dried blood, and it read, "Do that again, and I'll rip your fucking head off." Unsurprisingly, my friend never rode the night bus again. I don't know what the Headphones Guy's deal is, but my advice is to leave him well alone. So, at this point, you're probably wondering why one would wish to catch the night bus at all, given how you'll be transported to a terrifying alternate reality and encounter otherworldly spirits who wish to trap you there. Well, the short answer is that no sane person would, excepting a handful of crazed urban adventurers and paranormal investigators such as myself. Most of those who've boarded the Phantom coach have done so by accident, not realizing what they were getting themselves into until it was too late. And most of us who ride the night bus once have no inclination to do so again. But for those of us who seek out the Phantom bus for a second, third, or in my case, fourth occasion, well, We have our reasons. One reason above all others, in fact. We want to see the Harbinger and ask him our one permitted question. I'll regret my first ride on the bus for the rest of my days. Although I was drunk, I had enough wits about me to see off the various tricks used by the ghouls, but I wasn't prepared for him. The Harbinger is the only passenger who isn't already riding on the bus when you first get on. He comes later, after you've negotiated your way through the ghostly entities, and you think the worst is behind you. The first thing you'll notice is the burning cross mounted on top of the darkened hillside, overlooking the road on the left-hand side. I remember the first time I saw that foreboding symbol and the immense fear I felt, as I knew something bad was coming. A moment after I spotted the cross, I was shocked to see the bus was slowing down. I'm pulling over to the side of the road and parking up in a lay-by. Next, the driver operated the swing door at the front of the bus, opening it to whatever lay on the other side. The terror almost overwhelmed me as I thought of the horrors that lurked within the Shadowlands, of the creatures and demons hiding in the haunted woods and hillsides. I recall looking to the other passengers, somehow hoping these devious spirits would offer me some protection from whatever was coming, but instead their heads were down, as they all maintained a solemn silence. Realizing I was on my own, I glanced out the window to witness a sight which chilled me to my very bones. There was a small, covered shelter by the roadside, almost covered by overgrown vegetation and only visible in the dim light. And within this seemingly abandoned bus shelter stood a tall, hooded figure, a sinister individual with his face covered and his considerable frame hidden underneath a long and dark robe. The mystery man remained still and silent, although I soon spotted the animal by his side, a large black dog that snarled aggressively through a snout filled with razor-sharp teeth as it glared at me with hungry and predatory eyes. There was only a thin glass pane separating me from him. I imagined the hound breaking loose, ascending the steps and charging down the aisle before burying its razor-sharp fangs into my soft flesh. Thankfully, the dog's master retained control of his beast, although I was far from out of danger. I also noticed how hot and stifling it suddenly became. An almost unbearable wave of heat hit me. Meanwhile, the bus remained parked for what seemed like an eternity, its door ajar as the driver waited to see whether his passengers would get on. Now, I've since learned that the hooded figure we call the Harbinger will do one of two things at this point. Either he will remain rooted to the spot until eventually the driver will say something like, "Well, not tonight then," before he closes the door and drives on. From what I've been able to gather from both my own experiences and those of my contemporaries, this is what happens most of the time. 2 times out of 3, the Harbinger won't step out from the bus shelter, and that'll be the end of it. But sometimes, he will step forward, marching through the mud in his heavy boots while dragging his hellhound along on a leash. And he'll come on the bus, prompting the driver to say, "Good evening, sir. I trust you'll have a pleasant journey." The Harbinger won't answer, instead gliding down the aisle with his faithful mutt following behind him. He'll take a seat near the front of the bus, pulling down his hood to reveal what lies underneath. To this day, I can't fully explain what I saw in that terrifying moment. It seemed like there was only a dark void where his face should be, with 2 burning orbs instead of eyes. He had no mouth that I could see, and so by rights shouldn't have been able to speak. And yet he did, calling out to me in a booming, godlike voice which echoed throughout the hollow interior of the bus. "Come to me, mortal child. Come sit with me, so we may speak." As you can imagine, I was utterly terrified in this moment, so much so that I thought I might pass out. But for reasons I can't explain, I obeyed the Harbinger's orders, feeling like I could physically not resist him, and as if my legs were no longer under my control. I remembered looking to the other passengers as I walked down the aisle, hoping that one of them could help me. But each of the 4 kept their heads down as they muttered in unison, reciting a prayer in a language I couldn't understand. It became obvious that the Harbinger held power over these lost souls, and they were all trapped under a spell. Perhaps they were once like us, falling victim to the Phantom Bus and the Harbinger's godlike powers. In any event, they offered me no assistance in that fateful moment, and I soon realized I was completely at the Harbinger's mercy. I involuntarily took a seat in the road directly behind the Harbinger. His head turned in an unnatural way to face me as his dog snarled aggressively in my direction, but thankfully, it resisted the urge to bite me in the leg. I can't really describe how the Harbinger smelled, other than to say he stank of death. The fiery orbs he had instead of eyes stared right at me, and I couldn't look away no matter how much I tried. I felt like I was on fire, my soul burning under his hateful glare. In my state of abject terror, I imagined what this monster might do to me. I reckoned he could kill me with ease, but this was the least of my fears. Instead, I believe I may become like the others, another anonymous lost soul riding this damn bus for all eternity. In any event, I was powerless to do anything in that moment other than remain frozen to my seat, waiting for the Harbinger to speak. Despite his absence of eyes, I could somehow tell he was looking down on me, that he considered me with total contempt, like I was something he'd stepped in. To this day, I don't know whether he was speaking out loud or if his booming voice was only in my head. Either way, I found myself totally transfixed as he spoke his words. "I see another mere mortal has found its way into my realm. I'll confess to having little time for your contemptible and weak race. Nevertheless, I must respect the bravery of the odd individuals such as yourself. Not many have the courage to come to this dark place. For this reason, I will grant you safe passage, and I will answer you one question. Ask me what you will, mere mortal, and I will impart to you my infinite knowledge." Now, this is a moment I've replayed over and over again in my mind over the years. I could literally ask the Harbinger anything. The winning of lottery numbers, who killed JFK, the meaning of life. He sees and knows everything, and the possibilities are limitless. One of the guys on our forum asked the Harbinger how he would die, and was told that his vices would kill him within 6 months. Well, this guy was an addict, but he laughed off the Harbinger's warning and continued using. 6 months later, he was dead from an overdose. And then there was a young woman who, at the time of her encounter with the Harbinger, was stuck in an abusive and controlling relationship. She asked the entity what would happen if she stayed with her asshole boyfriend. Well, she was told that her life would end unless she broke it off. This proved to be the motivation she needed to leave him, and about a year later, the son of a bitch was arrested for taking the life of another girl and ultimately sentenced to life in prison. But of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. I felt nothing but pure terror as I sat frozen to my seat, quaking in my boots as the Harbinger glared down upon me with disgust. In that chilling moment, I could only think of one question to ask, which I stuttered out from my trembling lips. "What are you?" I swore I could hear the creature scoff with contempt before he gave his answer. "My poor child. Alas, you humans will never fully comprehend what I am and what I represent. Nevertheless, I owe you an answer, and so I shall explain in the simplest of terms. I am the past, the present, and the future.
I see all from where I stand, and yet I have sworn not to intervene in the mortal realm."
He paused momentarily, turning his burning orbs towards the darkened landscape outside the window.
"This world you see before me is my kingdom, my domain. I offer sanctuary to those who have nowhere else to go, giving a home to those lost souls trapped between the mortal and eternal realms. Perhaps you will come here one day and become a permanent resident of my dark realm. Or perhaps not. You could have inquired after your ultimate fate, of course, but you choose not to do so. But I have answered your one permitted question and fulfilled my obligation. And now, my child, I will bid you farewell."
With that, he rose from his chair and summoned his hound, gliding down the aisle as he made for the exit. I was flabbergasted and in a state of shock. I still had so many questions to ask, and I opened my mouth without thinking. "Wait!" I called after him, instantly regretting my decision to speak. The Harbinger turned sharply, his orb-like eyes burning ever fiercer, his hound growling as it bared its sharp teeth, pulling on its lead as it tried to get at me. When the Harbinger spoke again, his tone became angry and threatening.
"Heed my warning, you damn fool. I have tolerated your presence in my realm thus far, but do not test my patience. I can inflict pain upon you which goes beyond your worst nightmares, and I will not hesitate to do so if you break my rules again."
I felt all the blood drain from my face and my whole body shook uncontrollably as sheer terror overcame me. Needless to say, I did not utter another word. Instead, I watched on in shocked awe as a Harbinger glided down the aisle, dragging his snarling hellhound with him. The driver brought the bus to a slow halt to allow the godlike creature to disembark. I began to feel pangs of relief as I thought my ordeal was nearly over. But there was one last twist to this macabre episode. As the Harbinger stepped off the bus, my fellow passengers suddenly shot up from their seats, all simultaneously turning in my direction. To my horror, I saw how their eyes had turned jet black, and their mouths were opened wide, revealing gaping black holes. It seemed like they were all trying to scream, and yet no sound emitted. And then I saw what was lurking in the darkened woods on either side of the road. Hundreds of fiery red eyes emerging from the tree line, belonging to the unholy beasts that howled like wolves in the night. Every one focused upon our bus. I screamed out in terror, fearing that the Harbinger had changed his mind and was summoning his hellish minions to tear me to pieces. The howling rapidly increased in volume, becoming so loud that I was near deafened. What happened next remained something of a blur in my memory. I recalled the horrific din, and the pressure built up inside my head until I thought my skull would explode. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, forcing me to hide my eyes underneath my hands. A moment later, I opened my eyes again, only to discover that the beasts had vanished, as had my ghoulish fellow passengers. I was on my own inside the bus, just me and the driver, as we continued down that lonely stretch of road. I have very little recollection of the rest of the journey. I don't think it was much longer before we left the dark realm and returned to the city streets I knew and recognized. When we arrived home on my street, I couldn't believe it, thinking this was just another trick. I sat still in my seat for some time until eventually I needed to be prompted by the driver, who called out to me saying, "You stop, friend. Come on now, please. I can't wait here all night." With some trepidation, I walked down the aisle and stepped off the bus, feeling the cool, fresh air against my skin as I returned to the realm of the living. I recall the driver wishing me good night and saying he would see me again before he drove away. So, that's my story, but it's not quite the end of it. You may well ask why I didn't abandon my obsession with the phantom bus after my terrifying encounter. Well, for a long time I did. But in the end, my curiosity got the better of me. I used to just think that's just the way it is. But now I know better. The Harbinger is out there, and he can provide the answers I need. I won't waste my opportunity a second time. For years I've chased the bus, and I've caught it a further 2 times. On both occasions, I boarded and avoided the trap set by the ghoulish passengers, and both times, I waited for the Harbinger to board, but he wouldn't move from his shelter, and so my hopes were frustrated. It's been extremely disheartening, but I won't give up. Tonight, I will seek out the bus once again, and I'll keep doing so until the Harbinger answers my call. I know the risks. One night, I may board the phantom coach and never make it home. But nevertheless, I need to do this. I must know the truth, no matter what the cost. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a bus to catch. If you're listening to this, it means I'm not hallucinating. I really made it back, at least for now. He told me I had 24 hours, maybe less. I want to let you know my experience and warn you in case I don't make it back a second time. I don't know who you are or how you stumbled upon this, but you need to listen. I'm not supposed to be here. I shouldn't be anywhere. I died. I remember the impact, the twisting metal, the silence that followed. But I never moved on. Something found me in that in-between place. It gave me a choice. I don't know if I made the right one. Maybe I did. Maybe I doomed myself. All I know is I'm still here, and I have a job to do. This is my story. I don't remember much about the crash, but apparently I died. I was having an out-of-body experience, floating next to the wreckage, watching my lifeless body. Before I could register what was happening, someone appeared in front of me. He was tall, well-dressed, and somewhat skinny, with red skin, black hair, and horns curling from his head. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. What are you?" The figure smiled, an effortless, almost amused expression. "Me? I'm a collector, investor, and an innovator. And I can tell you and I are going to be good friends," he added with a sinister smile. There was something about the way he spoke, calm, measured, too confident, that made my stomach twist. I gasped. Are you the devil? Am I going to hell?" His golden eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "Not quite, my friend." His voice was warm, almost inviting. "I am the archdemon Mephistopheles, and I am here to help you." "Help me?" Yeah, right. A demon appearing at the exact moment of my death offering help? No, this was a trick. This is where it all fell apart. Hell, damnation, eternal suffering? I swallowed hard. "Help me how? You want my soul?" Mephisto chuckled, stepping closer, just enough for me to see the faint glow of embers swirling in his pupils. We demons get a bad rep, you know. But Well, some of it is true. I can grant wishes. I can bring you back to life so you can live happily ever after with your wife and daughter. It was too good to be true. My mind screamed trap. But there was something in his voice. It felt convincing and comforting, like I was talking to an old friend. Was he hypnotizing me? Was my response even mine? Or was my fate already determined? Why would you do that? Why help me? His smile deepened, but his eyes never changed. Well, you have something I want. And I am a sucker for a good deal. A deal? For what, my soul? My undying loyalty? Oh, no, nothing so dramatic. I like to be fair with my trades. All I need from you is to collect a handful of souls for me. 16, to be exact. The air felt heavier. What? You want me to kill for you? No way, forget it. Crawl back to whatever hellspawn you came from. Mephisto didn't react. If anything, his expression softened, like he was indulging a child throwing a tantrum. Let's not call it killing. Think of it as collecting. And besides, he added, feigning a look of concern, I would never ask you to harm an innocent soul. What kind of monster do you think I am? Then who? All I need is for you to clean up a dungeon full of creatures and bring me their souls. You'd be a hero, really, ridding the world of pests, he replied, obviously pleased with himself. My pulse pounded in my ears. I'm no fighter. I don't know how to slay creatures. I can't, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Ah, but you won't be alone. I'll grant you a small fraction of my power to get you started. It'll be like we're fighting together. You know, teamwork. And the dungeon? It's full of weapons and items. Just look for the shiny ones. I hesitated. He was making it sound easy. Too easy. And after that? His eyes gleamed. After that, you're free to go. I'll bring you back to life and your daughter will have her daddy again. My throat tightened. Jessica. My baby girl. She was going to be 7 next week. My wife, my love, my perfect life. Everything I fought so hard to build, and right when I had it, ripped away in an instant. I had done everything right. I worked hard, built a home, stayed out of trouble. And yet here I was, staring at my own corpse while this thing stood there, offering me a way out to get back what I lost. My hands clenched into fists. And will I ever have to see you again? Mephisto's grin widened, smooth as silk. Only if you want to. He extended a hand. So, do we have a deal? I stared at him, at the wreckage, and my own lifeless body. It wasn't fair. I deserved another chance. Anger engulfed my thoughts, and with a determined voice I said, Okay, get me my life back, before shaking his hand and stealing my fate. Mephisto smiled, his sharp teeth glinting. Good choice. I don't remember closing my eyes. One moment I was shaking his hand, and the next, I was here. I was standing in a hallway. It stretched endlessly in both directions, dimly lit by an eerie reddish-orange glow that seemed to seep from the very walls. The air was thick, like I was breathing through syrup, and it reeked of sulfur and decay. The stench of the dungeon clung to my throat and made me want to puke. My limbs aching, my mind foggy, I fell onto my knees. The floor was cold and dusty. I felt bugs start to crawl up my legs. I was about to pass out. This was it. What was I thinking making a deal with the hellspawn? Then I felt it. For a second, something pulsed inside me. An unnatural heat crawled through my skin, seeping into my veins, into my bones. It was Mephisto's power. It felt good. It felt amazing. My senses sharpened. The air no longer strangled me. The filth, the stench, the crawling insects? They were nothing now. But already I felt it fading. The power was bleeding away, slow but steady. I had to move, fast. I turned, expecting to see Mephisto standing there, watching, waiting. But I was alone. The only thing that greeted me was the glint of metal. A pile of weapons, armor, trinkets scattered across the floor like discarded relics from forgotten battles. I crouched, running my fingers through the rubble. Most were broken, rusted, shattered, useless. I tossed aside splintered bows and dull daggers until my hand closed around something I could barely see, could barely feel. A long blade. It was dulled and chipped, but whole. I exhaled sharply. This was it? This scrap of metal was supposed to save my life? Frustration bubbled up. This? My voice echoed down the endless corridor. This is the best I get? Then, something inside me shifted. A piece of that demonic power tore from my body and sank into the sword. The metal shuddered. The rust peeled away. Before my eyes, the dull edge sharpened itself, the chips and cracks knitting together as if time was reversing. When the transformation stopped, the blade was as good as new, back to its former glory. Suddenly, my body felt heavier, weaker. The air felt denser. I had given up some of the demonic energy keeping me together to restore the sword. But looking at it now, feeling the weight in my hands, I finally had a chance. My joy, however, was short-lived. Just as my blade got restored, I heard a faint skittering, slow, deliberate. I froze. My fingers clenched around the hilt of the blade as I turned my head just enough to catch movement in the shadows. Our eyes met. It was huge, a spider-like creature as tall as me while standing on its 8 legs. Its fur was a deep, sickly purple, and its blood-red eyes gleamed with hunger. Etched into its back was a pentagram, burned into its flesh like some kind of cursed mark. It took a step closer, then another. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. It kept advancing. I had to think of something quick. Its body was massive, but its legs were rather thin, brittle. I could cripple it. If I could just cut off its mobility, I had a chance. I crept forward, careful not to make a sound, gripping my sword tightly. I swung the sword with everything I had. Crack! One of its legs snapped clean off. The creature let out a piercing screech, its body convulsing in rage. I barely had time to react before it lunged. I threw myself back, just dodging its fangs, but my leg caught on something. Its web. Sticky strands coiled around my ankle, tightening like a noose. I tried to yank free, but before I could, the creature was already on top of me. I swung once more but missed. Its leg slammed into my thigh, pinning me down, and searing pain tore through my body as one of its fangs pierced my calf. The venom burned as it entered my bloodstream. I screamed. Desperation took over. I gripped the sword tight and thrust it deep into the spider's body. The creature let out a horrific screech and recoiled, tearing its fangs from my leg in the process. My muscles snapped like rubber bands. The web ripped apart, but so did my leg. A chunk of my own flesh dangled from its fangs. I didn't wait. I forced myself up and ran. Each step was agony. The pain was unimaginable. Bones grinding together, blood gushing down my ankle. But I didn't stop. I found a crack in the wall, barely wide enough to squeeze into. I threw myself inside and collapsed, panting, trembling, The spider thrashed outside. It scraped against the stone, but it couldn't reach me. I was safe. But the pain was too much. I couldn't take it anymore. I went into shock and fainted. I woke up to silence. I searched for scars but found none. My leg was all healed up. No torn muscle, no exposed flesh. Just smooth, unscarred skin. Yet something was wrong. Again, the air felt heavier, my limbs weaker. The demonic power inside me, the one keeping me alive, had faded even more. My time here was running out. I had to act fast. I grabbed my blade and crawled out of my hiding place, heart pounding, my body still aching. The dungeon was different now. No longer just one endless corridor. No, now there were turns. Rooms, paths, twisting tunnels. I moved carefully, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. I needed to find something. Something smaller, something weaker. Something I could actually kill. You can imagine the excitement I felt when I finally saw it. A rat-like creature, barely larger than a dog, and it hadn't noticed me yet. I crept closer, preparing to attack. That's when I felt it. A sharp, cutting pain on my right side. Unbeknownst to me, as I was stalking my prey, something else was stalking me. I turned slowly and saw a group of 3 skeletons. Silent, expressionless, and armed. I tried to defend myself, but it was no use. They had stabbed me in my liver, and my body went into shock. I could barely move my arms. They swung again, piercing my gut, and a third time piercing my chest. I fell back, the room turning dark. I was bleeding out. In the distance, I heard a roar, and it was coming closer. My vision gave out. Everything went dark, but I was still conscious, barely. I heard screams and a tussle. I heard bones breaking. Were they mine or of the skeletons? I don't know. That's as far as I remember before fainting again. I don't know how long I was out, but when I opened my eyes, all I saw was black. Absolute, suffocating darkness. I could hear drops of liquid dripping somewhere in the distance. Slowly, the air was dry, carrying a pungent stench of decay, yet it didn't have the same crushing weight as before. My body felt good, healed at least to an extent, enough to move. The demonic power Mephisto had given me was almost non-existent now, just a faint ember in the pit of my soul. And yet somehow I was still around and kicking, still breathing, still alive. I was sitting on something that creaked beneath my weight. A rocking chair? I pulled myself up, only to immediately step onto something soft and damp. My foot sank slightly into it before I pulled back, my pulse quickening. I pressed forward, feeling my way through the pitch-black void. The space was vast. I couldn't find any walls. As I navigated blindly, my fingers brushed against broken fragments of wood. A shattered table? A chair? I couldn't tell. There were more of them scattered all around. Then my hand found something else. Was that skin? I yanked my arm back instinctively, expecting to be attacked. But nothing happened. The thing didn't move. Heart pounding, I forced myself to reach out again. My fingers ran over smooth, ice-cold skin. I felt a body, but there was no head. Whatever this thing was, it was long dead. Where the hell was I? I needed to find a way out, fast. But as I took another step, my foot caught on something and I collapsed forward. A sharp clattering sound echoed throughout the space as I landed on something solid, something hard. I knew that sound. Warily, I reached down and traced the shape with my hands. Skulls, jaws, long, brittle bones, piles of them. A cold shudder ran down my spine. Was I in the skeleton's lair? The same creatures that had nearly killed me before? No, this was different. These weren't animated soldiers. These were just remains. Leftovers. Leftovers from something much worse. Before I could react, something grabbed me. Something big. A massive arm wrapped around my torso, lifting me effortlessly off the ground. I gasped as a deep, raspy voice murmured,
"You're hurt, dear. You need your medicine."
The voice was wrong, distorted. It was a mix between the voice of a woman and a growl of a beast. I was carried through the darkness, cradled in a grip far too strong for me to break. My body was still weak. My blade was gone. I had no way to fight back. I was at the mercy of this thing. She set me down gently. I was back on that rocking chair. Then something flickered in her hand. A dull red glow. It wasn't bright, but it was enough for me to finally see my captor. She was massive, easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Long, black, unkempt hair hung over her face. Her limbs were unnaturally long and meaty, her fingers ending in black, jagged nails. She was wearing an old white gown riddled with holes. But really, it was her face that made my stomach twist. The skin didn't fit. It sagged, loose and drooping, as if it had melted away and barely clung to the bone underneath. The excess flesh hung over one eye entirely, while the other barely peeked through the folds. She tilted her head slightly, the motion making the skin shift and stretch in unnatural ways. Then she smiled. Her teeth were crooked, uneven, like shards of broken glass forced into a grin.
"That's enough for now, dear. Soon, you should feel much better,"
she whispered. The amulet in her hand stopped glowing. Utter darkness surrounded us once more. I heard her footsteps retreating, fading into the void and leaving me by myself. And yet, she was right. I was feeling better. The pain was dulling, strength returning to my limbs. Whatever that amulet was, it was healing me. This pattern continued for what felt like an eternity. I would try to find an exit, but before I could even reach a wall, she would find me. Every time, she would patiently drag me back to that old rocking chair and say,
"You're hurt, dear. Come back. The outside is dangerous, my child. Stay where it's safe."
She never acted hostile, never raised her voice, never struck me. But her sheer size and imposing presence, it was enough. Enough to keep me trapped. She treated me like I was her child. She would try to feed me, offering chunks of creatures she hunted in the dungeon, but I could never stomach them. So, she kept me alive with the amulet instead. Just enough to stay conscious. Just enough to keep me moving. Never enough to fight back. I tried communicating with her a couple times, although my tries didn't yield much success. Once, I told her I was feeling weak and needed more energy from the amulet. Her response, though, was rather disturbing.
No, dear. Too much of a good thing is bad. It will turn you bad. It will turn you rotten."
Her voice was soft, almost mourning.
"Rotten and evil like the others. The ones before."
The ones before? Were they the skeletons? The corpses I found? She shook her head slowly.
"The amulet. The demon. He turned them bad. Made them sick. Evil. I had to put them down. My children, my poor children."
I swallowed hard. Are you talking about Mephisto? I asked cautiously. That was a mistake. Her entire body stiffened. Her fingers twitched, nails scraping against the floor. Her head jerked up unnaturally like a puppet being yanked by its strings.
"Evil."
Her voice dropped into a harsh whisper.
"Evil demon, liar, deceiver. Don't trust him. Don't trust him, my child."
For the first time, there was something sharp in her tone. Something dangerous. But just as quickly as it came, it faded away. She slumped, murmuring an apology before leaving me alone again. I was surviving. But this wasn't living. She hated Mephisto, that much was clear. But I needed to collect souls. I needed to escape. Time was slipping away from me, and I needed to get back to my family. My real family. I don't know how long I had been trapped. The darkness, the isolation, it was starting to get to me. But there was one thing I noticed. Every time she left to hunt, I would hear it. A faint, distant sound. The shifting of bricks. It was subtle. The sound of dripping liquid also made it difficult to hear. But with enough practice and concentration, I got the hang of it. I didn't have enough time to find the exit, but I could run to the bone pile and back. Bit by bit, I moved bones from the pile closer to me, sharpening them against each other in secret. I couldn't hold on to them. She would see and take them away. But I kept them nearby, within reach. She wanted me to call her mother, so that's what I started doing. I had to play along. I pretended to love her. I let her believe I was different from the others. But then, one day, I got careless. I had finally finished sharpening my weapons. I guess I was too excited as I didn't hear her approach this time. Out of nowhere, her massive hand gripped my wrist, lifting one of my makeshift spears.
Sharp and dangerous, my child.
Her voice was calm, yet sharp.
What are you doing with these?
My heart pounded, my body went cold. I had to think, and I had to think fast. They're a gift, Mother, I said quickly, forcing warmth into my voice. For you, so you can hunt those evil monsters easier. Silence. Then she let out a deep, pleased hum.
Oh, child, you are not like the rest, are you?
She patted my head almost affectionately.
But Mother is strong. She doesn't need these brittle bones.
And with that, she crushed every single one of my weapons with her bare hands. I was devastated. All that work, all that time, gone. What now? Then things got worse. One day, as I sat in my rocking chair, she returned from her hunt. But she wasn't alone. With her was another body. She sat it down next to me, her loose, sagging face pulling into something that resembled a smile.
You have been such a good boy, dear. So I brought you a friend. What should we name him?
The person she had brought was no more than a corpse, freshly killed, judging by heat that surrounded the body and the smell of it. Perhaps she tried to save it, just like she did with me, but wasn't as lucky. She tried to revive him with the amulet, but it was too late. He was gone. Nevertheless, that didn't stop her from acting like he was alive. She leaned close, her breath hot against my ear.
Dear, I said, what should we name him?
A cold sweat broke out down my spine. Ray sounds like a good name, Mother, I said with a shaky voice. Her jagged teeth gleamed in the dim light of the amulet.
Ah, wonderful child. Let's name him Ray. I hope you two get along.
And then she left. I was barely holding it together. I was trapped, barely alive, going insane from the darkness and isolation. And now I had to talk to a corpse as my companion. But then I noticed something. Tucked beneath Ray's stiff, cold fingers was a dagger. She must have overlooked it. It wasn't strong enough, not yet, to really give it strength. I needed to infuse it with Mephisto's demonic power, the way I did with my first weapon. But the only way to obtain more demonic power was through the amulet. I had to get it somehow. I started planning. I got the dagger, buried it deep below the moist ground next to my rocking chair, and moved Ray further back. I broke the legs of his rocking chair so that even a small push would make him fall. And then I waited. When the mother came for our usual dose of the amulet, I threw a small rock at the other rocking chair and Ray fell over. "Mother! Ray fell! He's hurt! I'll hold on to the amulet, you check on him! You can trust me, Mother!" In an instant, she rushed to his side, leaving the amulet in my hands. This was my chance. I dug out the dagger and clutched the amulet tight, letting its power surge through me, and for the first time in a while, I felt Mephisto's power fusing with my own again. It felt good. It felt amazing. I felt just like I did when I first entered the dungeon. It wasn't as subtle as I hoped, though. The dim glow turned into a blinding crimson light. The entire room lit up. For the first time, I saw everything clearly. The mother turned around. In an instant, she lunged at me, screaming,
"No, child, don't! It will corrupt you! It will make you undesirable!"
She smacked the amulet from my hands. The light didn't fade, though. It was too late. The amulet was already activated. I had already gotten its power and imbued it with the dagger, so I lunged forward, slashing her in the torso. I could see I hurt her, but this one slash wasn't nearly enough to finish her off.
"I trusted you, child. You betrayed me, just like the others. Now you are sick, wicked. But it's okay. Mother will put you down."
She lunged. Her claws slashed across my side, sending me flying across the room. Blood filled my mouth and some was dripping from my back and side. I had never imagined she was this powerful. As soon as I got up on my feet, she was already up on my face, her drooping skin even more unsettling on the eerie glow of the amulet. I managed to dodge her attack just in the nick of time and slashed at her ankles. She screamed in pain and lashed out, her sharp talon-like nails slicing clean through my right arm, severing both flesh and bone. Before I could react, she hurled me across the room again. The impact shattered what little remained of my unbroken bones. The pain was unbearable. My arm was gone, and my dagger with it. My body was broken. I was done. And she was coming closer. Then I saw it. One of my bone spears. She must have kept it. It was just within arm's reach. With the last of my strength, I grabbed onto it, channeling what little demonic energy remained in me, pouring nearly all of it into the weapon. If I had any chance of piercing her skin, this had to be it. But as the energy drained from my body and into the spear, the pain intensified, threatening to pull me into unconsciousness. Then the mother lunged. I forced myself into position. At the last second, I drove the spear into her heart. She crumbled beside me. From her body, a blue flame emerged. Her soul, perhaps? It drifted toward me, then sank into my chest. A wave of relief washed over me, dulling the agony, if only for a moment. I had collected my first soul. As I lay there, staring at the crooked ceiling bathed in the dim red glow of the amulet, I blinked and was met with a blinding white light. I felt warmth on my skin and felt hot, small pebbles beneath me. The air felt fresh and filled my lungs with vitality. I heard sirens and chatter. Where was I? As my eyes adjusted to the light, I realized it was the sun. I was back on Earth, or at least it seemed like it. I turned my head and I was next to some cheap motel. The people didn't seem to notice me, though. I turned right. My arm was back and my wounds were gone. I was back to full health, or as close as I'll ever get, I guess. I heard slow clapping from behind and a chuckle. I turned around and there he was. Oh, bravo, bravo. I knew you could do it, said Mephisto, standing there with a wide smile. I was too disoriented from everything that had happened. I couldn't gather my thoughts to talk, to ask a question. Mephisto took a slow look around.
Isn't it nice here?
Is this Earth? I asked, expecting to be pulled back into the horrors of the dungeon.
Well, of course, he said,
tilting his head slightly.
I figured you deserved a little reward after all that. Wouldn't you agree?
A strange mix of emotions welled inside me. Relief, exhaustion, suspicion. I did it. I killed her. I got the soul, I said with a shaky voice.
Indeed. Your first taste of victory. But let's not get ahead of ourselves now. You still have 15 more souls to collect.
The people around us kept moving, carrying on with their everyday lives, oblivious to our conversation. The people around us, can they see us? I asked, barely keeping it together.
Oh, of course not. I wanted a little privacy between us. You have about 24 hours here, give or take. After that, duty calls. So make the most of it, will ya?
He said, tilting his head to one side and giving me a wink. After that, he was gone. Not in a blink, not in a swirl of shadows. He was simply no longer there. Like he had never existed at all. At that moment, I heard a voice in the distance calling me. Sir, are you all right? Do you need help? I turned. A motel employee stood nearby, concern etched on his face. For a moment I hesitated. Then, without saying a word, I followed him inside. The rest of the staff greeted me. Despite me not saying a word to them, they welcomed me and gave me a room to stay in. Probably thought I was homeless or something. They were kind people. I guess that was the reason Mephisto brought me here. His idea of giving me a break. I still didn't know where I was exactly. I was too tired to ask. In my room, I found a laptop. The same one I'm using to type and voice this message out. And next to the laptop was this old book with beautiful engravings on it. Its pages were empty, though, and next to it was a sticky note that read,
"A little something to get you going. You got this."
With an M at the bottom, one end of the letter curling into a devil's tail. I didn't know what to make of it, so I opted for the laptop. I arrived at the motel around 11 a.m. yesterday. It's currently 10:30 a.m. I don't have much time left. I hope I manage to remember all the important stuff. Whoever is listening to this message is a warning. Don't trust Mephisto. Death is a better fate than the one that awaits those who are foolish enough to make a deal with him. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the ad. Night clerk wanted, no experience necessary, high pay, cash only. That last part stood out. Nobody pays in cash anymore, and definitely not at the rate that they were offering. 3 times what a normal graveyard shift job would pay. But I was desperate. Rent was overdue. My car was on the verge of breaking down, and my fridge was as empty as my bank account. The motel sat on the outskirts of town, a crumbling relic from the 70s, barely visible from the highway. The neon sign flickered erratically, buzzing like a dying insect. Moonlight Motel, it read, though half the letters were burnt out. It looked abandoned, but as I pulled into the cracked parking lot, I saw a single light glowing from the office window. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of mildew and something else. Something metallic like rust or blood. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he hadn't slept in years. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the flickering fluorescent lights, and his eyes were sunken, shallowed by deep circles. "You here for the job?" His voice was flat, emotionless, I hesitated before nodding. He pushed a set of keys across the desk. You start tonight. No interview? Not necessary. I should have walked out right then, but the weight of my empty wallet kept me rooted to the spot. I swallowed my unease. Any rules? The man's gaze darkened. His lips barely moved as he spoke. Never question the guests. A chill crawled up my spine. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told me I wouldn't like the answer. Instead, I nodded, took the keys, and stepped behind the counter. The man stood up and grabbed his coat. I'll be back at dawn. Don't leave the office. Don't talk too much. And whatever you see on the cameras, ignore it. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone in the dim, humming silence of the Moonlight Motel. And that was the beginning of the longest night of my life. At first, the shift was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional gusts of wind rattling the windows. I busied myself organizing the scattered papers on the desk, trying to ignore the peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of something rotten wafting from the vents. The guest log sat open in front of me. I flipped through the pages. Something was off. The names were strange. Some were illegible, written in symbols I didn't recognize. Others were just initials, or single words like Mr. White or Mother. And then there were the dates. The most recent check-in was 3 days ago. No checkouts. Before that? A week? 2 weeks? A month? Pages and pages of guests arriving, but never leaving. A shiver crept up my spine. The bell above the office door jingled, and I nearly jumped out of my chair. A man stood in the doorway. At least, I thought it was a man. His face was wrong. Something about the way the shadows fell across it made it seem like his features were shifting, like his mouth and nose weren't quite where they should be. His suit was too clean, too crisp, like it had just been ironed moments before. He didn't blink. I need a room, he said. His voice didn't match his lips. There was a lag, like a badly dubbed movie. I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. Sure, how many nights? He tilted his head slightly. Just the one. A lie. I knew that now. I handed him a key, trying not to let my fingers touch his as he took it. His skin was ice cold. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the hallway. His footsteps were off, too slow, too deliberate, like he was mimicking how a person should walk, but not quite getting it right. I watched him disappear into the shadows of the motel's dimly lit corridor. I should have ignored the cameras like the manager said, but I didn't. I turned to the monitor, watching the grainy black and white feet of the hallway outside room number 6, where the man had just gone. He stood in front of the door, motionless. Seconds passed, then minutes. He didn't move. Then, all at once, the screen flickered with static. And when the image returned, the man was staring directly into the camera. His face was too close, stretched unnaturally across the screen, as if he knew I was watching. And then, he smiled. Not a normal smile, not a human smile. It was too wide, stretching from ear to ear, his teeth long and needle-like, gleaming in the flickering light. I slammed the monitor off. I didn't sleep at all that night. And when dawn came, the man was gone. But the key to room 6 was on my desk, untouched. The second night felt heavier. I hadn't slept after what I saw on the cameras. Even in the daylight, the motel felt wrong. The air was stale, too still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. When I arrived for my shift, the manager barely acknowledged me. He sat in the office for a few minutes, staring at the wall before muttering, "You stayed. Good." Then he left, leaving me alone with whatever the hell was lurking in this place. The night started slow. I spent the first few hours flipping through the old guest logs, trying to make sense of the bizarre entries. I found names that had been repeated over and over across different years, decades even. Mr. White, Mother H, Carter H, Carter H, Carter. The same names, the same rooms, but always new dates. The wind howled outside. The walls groaned like they were breathing. Then, around 2 a.m., the noise started. A faint scratching coming from inside the vents. At first, I tried to ignore it. Rats, I told myself. Or maybe just the old pipes settling. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It wasn't just random scurrying. It was pacing. A slow, dragging movement, like something was crawling just beneath the surface. I turned up the tiny radio on the desk, trying to drown it out. That's when the phone rang. The motel phone, the one that had been silent all night. I picked it up, hesitant. Front desk. Static. Then a voice, faint and whispering. "Help me." My voice caught in my throat. Who is this? Silence. And then, thump. The sound came from inside the vent, just above my head. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Dust trickled from the metal grates. Whatever was inside was right there, pressing against the thin barrier. The metal creaked, bending outward slightly, as if something was pushing from the other side. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and aimed it at the vent. Who's in there? No answer. Just breathing, shallow, ragged breathing. And then, slowly, something moved. A shadow shifted behind the grate. A long, pale hand with fingers too many and too thin slipped through one of the gaps. It twitched, stretching unnaturally, grasping at the air. I staggered back. What the hell? And then bang! The vent dented outward, as if whatever was inside had thrown itself against it. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I grabbed the office door handle, ready to run, but then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. I stood there frozen, barely breathing. Minutes passed. The air was thick, oppressive. The vent remained still. And then, the phone rang again. I picked it up with a shaking hand. Static. And then the voice closer this time. "Don't look at them." Click. The line went dead. I nearly quit that night. But when dawn came, the manager returned as if nothing had happened. He didn't ask why my hands were shaking. Didn't ask why the vent was dented. Or why I had unplugged the security cameras. He just dropped an envelope of cash on the desk and said, "See you tonight." And, like an idiot, I showed up again. The third night felt worse. The motel seemed darker, the air heavier. The lights flickered more than usual. The neon sign outside buzzed like a dying fly, barely illuminating the lot. And the guests, they were watching me. They didn't talk. Not really. They'd come in, ask for a room in voices that barely sounded human, and disappear into the hall. I avoided eye contact, keeping my head down, pretending not to notice the way their faces shifted when they moved. Then, around midnight, she arrived. A woman. She was different from the others. She looked normal. Her face didn't change when I blinked. Her movements were smooth, natural. She had deep, sunken eyes, and her dark hair hung in wet strands over her face like she had just stepped out of a storm. She leaned in close when she spoke. "Please, I need a room." Her voice was hoarse, desperate. I hesitated. "How many nights?" Her hand clamped over mine, ice cold. Just one. The same lie they all told. I gave her the key to room 9. She didn't thank me, didn't even look at it. She just snatched it from my hand and hurried down the hallway, glancing over her shoulder as if something were following her. I watched her on the cameras. Unlike the others, she didn't just stand in front of her door. She locked it and bolted it, pushed the dresser in front of it. Then she sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes glued to the door. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to check on her. Maybe because she seemed scared. Maybe because she seemed real. I grabbed the master key and made my way down the hall. The motel felt suffocating, like the walls were pressing in. Every door I passed felt wrong, like something was breathing on the other side. When I reached room 9, I knocked softly. "Ma'am, everything okay?" Silence. Then a whisper. "They know why I'm here." My stomach twisted. Who? She didn't answer, but suddenly her eyes snapped to something behind me. I turned, and for the first time I saw one of them, one of the guests, standing at the end of the hall. Too tall, too thin, a silhouette darker than the shadows around it. Its head was tilted too far, its face blank. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin stretched over bone. It twitched, taking a jerky step forward. The lights flickered, and then another one appeared, and another, stepping out of the rooms, emerging from the darkness, surrounding me. The woman in room 9 grabbed my wrist, yanking me inside just as the lights went out. I didn't fight her. I didn't question it, because for the first time since I started this job, I knew one thing for certain. I was never supposed to leave this motel. The woman's grip was like ice, her nails digging into my skin as she slammed the door shut. "Turn off the light," she hissed. I barely had time to react before she reached past me and twisted the lamp switch. The room plunged into darkness. My pulse pounded in my ears as we stood there, barely breathing. Then the footsteps started. Slow, uneven, right outside the door. I wanted to move, to hide, to do something, but the woman squeezed my wrist tighter, her silent warning clear. "Don't." The floorboards creaked. Something was standing outside. The doorknob twitched. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay still. The darkness pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. I could hear it breathing. Or maybe that was the woman. Or maybe it was something else. Then something slid under the door. A shadow, long, stretching across the carpet like fingers curling towards my feet. I felt a cold, unnatural pull, like it was trying to drag me closer. My breath hitched as I took a tiny step back, but the second I moved, the shadow snapped towards me. The woman clamped a hand over my mouth before I could scream, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't speak. Don't speak. It can't see you unless you let it." The shadow twitched, hesitated, and then it retracted. The footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate. The door creaked as something leaned against it, its weight pressing against the wood, and I could feel it there, waiting. Minutes passed, maybe hours, and then nothing. It was gone. The woman finally let go of me, and I sucked in a ragged breath. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. She didn't answer at first, just walked to the window and peeled back the curtain an inch, peering outside. Then she whispered 3 words that made my stomach drop. "You saw them." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. She turned to face me, her sunken eyes full of something like pity. "You shouldn't have come to this place." I didn't have a choice. Her expression darkened. None of us did. Something about the way she said that made my skin crawl. I took a shaky breath. What are they? They don't have a name. Not one we can say. That doesn't make any sense. How long have you been working here? 3 nights. Her face twisted with something like grief. That's too long. My stomach clenched. What do you mean? She gestured toward the door. Did you notice? The ones who check in? I nodded slowly. They don't leave. Neither do the employees. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook my head. No, the manager, he leaves every morning. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Does he? The room felt colder. A horrible thought crept into my mind. The manager was always gone when I arrived, always back before dawn. I thought about the security cameras, the flickering static, the way some guests just stood in front of their doors, staring, unmoving. The way the motel seemed bigger at night, the hallways stretching longer than they should. What is this place? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, pressing it into my hand. A room key. But not just any key. It was old, rusted, the number worn away. The metal was ice cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. What is this? Her voice was hollow. The key to the real exit. My blood ran cold. There is no front door. Not really. That thing you walk through every night? It just brings you back in. I wanted to deny it, to argue, but deep down, I felt the truth in her words. I gripped the key tighter. And then the hallway light flickered. The air shifted. The woman went pale. They know I told you. A deep, rattling click echoed from the hallway, like every door was unlocking. And then the motel came alive. The walls groaned, the ceiling trembled, shadows leaked from under the door. The air was thick with the sound of something moving, countless bodies shifting, twitching, crawling. The woman grabbed my arm. Run! The door burst open, and I saw all of them. Not just the guests, but the manager. Something else. Something that had been waiting for me since the moment I arrived. And then the lights went out. The lights died. Total darkness swallowed the room, thick and suffocating, pressing against my skin like damp earth. I couldn't see my own hands, couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut, but I felt them. The guests, now standing in the doorway, waiting. A sound crawled through the dark. Bones popping, joints twisting, something wet and wrong shifting closer. A whisper right next to my ear. Where do you think you're going? Cold breath slid across my neck and I bolted. The woman grabbed my wrist, yanking me forward as we ran. I couldn't see, but she seemed to know where to go. My feet pounded against the carpet. The motel warping around us. The hallways stretching, doors multiplying, the air thick with the scent of rot and something metallic like blood. The sounds behind us grew louder, faster. The guests were following, moving with that horrible, jerky twitching like broken marionettes, their 2 long limbs scraping against the walls. Where are we going? The stairs! We turned a corner, and suddenly there they were. The stairs to the 2nd floor. Except there was no 2nd floor. I stopped short. What the hell? I had seen this motel from the outside. It was 1 story, no stairs, no upper level. But here they were, a long, spiraling staircase disappearing into the dark above us. Come on, she hissed, pulling me up the steps. I didn't fight her. As we climbed, the motel shifted around us. The walls grew taller, the air colder. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting shadows that moved on their own. A voice slithered through the dark. You don't
belong here.
It was everywhere. Behind us, above us, inside my own head. And then a hand shot out from between the steps. Thin, gray, fingers too long, clawing at my ankle. I kicked hard. The thing screeched, a high warbling sound like a skipping record. The woman yanked me up the last of the few steps, and suddenly, we weren't in the motel anymore. We were somewhere else. The air changed the second we stepped off the stairs. It was wrong. It was heavy. We stood in a narrow hallway lined with doors, hundreds of them, more than the hotel could possibly hold. They stretched endlessly in both directions, each door identical, wooden, numbered in brass. "This isn't real," I whispered. The woman ignored me, marching forward with quick, purposeful steps. "Stay close. Don't touch the doors." I followed, my heart hammering. The hallway was dead silent except for our footsteps, but I could feel something behind the doors, watching and listening. Then, as we passed room 209, knuckles rapped against the wood. I froze. The woman grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Don't stop." Another door knocked, and then another. The sound spread like a wave, growing faster, more frantic, dozens, no, hundreds of fists hammering against the wood. The hallway shook. The doors rattled in their frames, and then one swung open. A long, pale arm shot out, fingers grasping, nails splintering as they dug into the floor. Then the rest of the thing followed. A thing crawling out on too many limbs, its head lolling, mouth yawning open in a soundless scream. We ran. The hallway stretched, growing louder, the doors warping and pulsing like breathing flesh. The lights flickered wildly, casting grotesque shifting shadows that didn't match our movements. Something was chasing us, and I didn't dare look back. Then the woman stopped. I skidded to a halt beside her. "What the hell are you doing? Keep moving!" She didn't respond. She was staring at a door that was different from the others. Black. No number, no handle. "The exit," she breathed. I didn't ask questions. I reached for the key she had given me earlier, shoved it into the lock, and twisted. The door screamed. Not a creak, not a groan. A full, shrieking wail as if the wood itself was alive. The air turned ice cold. The motel shuddered, the hallway collapsing inward. And then the door swung open, and on the other side, there was nothing. A black void stretching endlessly. Cold air pulled at me, dragging me toward it like a gaping mouth ready to swallow me whole. The woman grabbed my wrist. "This is the only way out." I stared into the darkness. My stomach twisted with a primal, gut-wrenching fear. Something waited in that void. Something worse than the guess. The hallway behind us collapsed, doors crumbling into the walls, shadows surging forward like a living thing. We had seconds to decide. Stay into the motel, or step into the unknown. And then the blackness reached for us. The darkness pulled. Not like gravity, not like wind. This was different. It felt alive, wrapping around my limbs, dragging me forward without touching me. The woman clutched my wrist. "Jump!" she hissed. My body refused. My mind screamed no. Every instinct I had told me that stepping into that void meant never coming back. Behind us, the motel collapsed, walls warping, floors splitting open like something beneath it was trying to crawl out. The guests, if they were ever really guests, were moving towards us in unnatural twitching jerks, their heads snapping side to side like broken puppets. And then the manager appeared. Not walking, not running. He was just there, right in front of us. His eyes were completely black now, no whites, no pupils. His face shifted, like it was made of something liquid. "You were doing so well," he said. voice smooth, empty. "You've almost made it." The shadows moved around him, curling at his feet like smoke. I grit my teeth. What the hell is this place? The woman tightened her grip on my wrist. "Don't listen to him. Jump!" The manager tilted his head too far, the skin at his neck stretching like wax. "Where do you think that door leads?" he said, gesturing back to the void. "Do you think it's an exit?" A cold dread settled in my stomach. He smiled, too wide. "There's no leaving, kid. Not through there. Not through anywhere." I didn't want to believe him, but something deep inside me did. The woman pulled me hard toward the void. "He's lying. If we stay, we become them." I turned back to the manager. His smile had disappeared. The guests surged forward. I had no choice. I jumped, and everything went black, falling. Not fast, not slow, just endless. But the darkness wasn't empty. It whispered. Not words, just sounds. Wet, clicking, distant voices, laughter that wasn't laughter. I tried to scream. My mouth wouldn't open. The woman beside me was falling, her hair whipping around her face, and her eyes met mine, and I saw fear. Not the kind you get when you're scared of the dark. The kind you get when you realize you've made a mistake. And we stopped. Not like landing. There was no impact. No jolt. Just suddenly we were somewhere else. I sucked in a sharp breath. My lungs burned. My body felt wrong. Like I had been turned inside out and stitched back together. I blinked. Light. Dim, flickering. The glow of a neon sign. The buzzing was the first thing I'd recognized. Then the hum of an old air conditioning unit. The sound of a TV playing something unintelligible. I was in a motel office. Not the same one, but almost the same one. The Moonlight Motel sign outside wasn't flickering anymore. It glowed a sickly red, the letters shifting slightly, like they were trying to spell something else. The woman sat beside me, breathing hard. "No, no, 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 no! We were supposed to get out!" I swallowed thickly. Maybe we did. She turned to look at me. "Does this look like out to you?" I didn't answer, because outside in the parking lot, there were cars. Not abandoned, not rusted. Running. Idling, full of people who looked normal. A man leaned against a truck smoking a cigarette. A woman adjusted her mirror in a silver sedan. A couple dragged suitcases toward the front door. It looked like a real motel. Like any motel. Except for one thing. The manager was still behind the desk. Not the same one, not exactly. But he looked right at me and smiled. Like he knew me. Like he had been waiting. A sick realization curdled in my stomach. I turned to the woman. She was staring at the guest log on the counter. Her hands were shaking. I stepped closer and looked over her shoulder. And there they were. Our names, written neatly in black ink. Checked in, but never checked out. The woman stepped back. "This isn't real. This isn't real." My head felt light, the air too thick. I turned back to the window, staring at the parking lot. And that's when I saw it. One of the guests. A woman standing near the vending machines, still, too still. Not blinking, not moving. And then her face shifted, just for a second. Like something else was underneath it. Wearing it. And I realized. None of these people were real. None of them had ever left. and neither would we. I couldn't breathe. The woman clutched my arm so tight it hurt, her nails digging into my skin. She was still staring at the guest log, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "We never left." The words hit me like a gut punch. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say something logical, something rational, but I couldn't. Because I knew she was right. The parking lot, the guests, the manager, it was all too perfect. The motel looked normal, but I had already seen what was beneath the surface. And so had she. "We have to go," I whispered. She nodded, snapping out of her daze. We turned toward the door, and he was standing there. The manager. Not behind the desk this time, but blocking the exit. His eyes bore into me, and his smile stretched just a little too wide. "Leaving? So soon?" His voice was calm, casual, as if we hadn't just fallen through a nightmare. The woman grabbed my wrist, pulling me towards the side door, and I didn't hesitate. We ran. Through the hall, past the guests, things in human skin, their faces flickering as they turned towards us, their eyes vacant, watching. We burst through the emergency exit and into the parking lot. The cars were gone. The people were gone. The world outside the motel was wrong. The road stretched forever. A perfect, unbroken black highway vanishing into an empty, starless sky. No moon, no streetlights, no sound. I turned in a slow circle, my breath turning to ice in my chest. We were alone. The woman grabbed my shoulders. "There has to be a way out." I nodded because I had to believe it. But then, the neon sign flickered. I turned toward it, my stomach twisting. It no longer said Moonlight Motel. The letters shifted, warping, buzzing, rearranging themselves into something new. A single word. Stay. And the front door swung open, and the guests began to step outside. Slow, jerky, twitching like broken dolls. Their heads twisted unnaturally, their smiles stretching too far. The manager walked out last, hands in his pockets. He looked at us with something close to amusement. "You can run, but you'll only come back." I swallowed hard. My skin crawled. "What do you mean?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. His smile widened. "You've always been here." The world lurched. The motel blinked, flickering, stretching, glitching like a dying signal. The parking lot melted into the lobby, the sky folded into wallpaper, and suddenly, we were inside again. Standing at the front desk, the guest log was open. 2 new names written inside, mine and hers. Checked in, never checked out. My head spun. I reached for the door again, but it wasn't there anymore. Just hallways. Endless hallways stretching out where the exit should have been. The floor throbbed beneath my feet, the walls warped like breathing flesh. The woman shook her head violently. "No, no, no, this can't be real." But it was. The manager leaned against the counter, watching us with mild curiosity. "You don't get it, do you? There's no out. No escape. No waking up." His black eyes glittered. "This place is a mouth, and it already swallowed you." I backed away. "That's bullshit. If we got in, we can get out." He chuckled. "You never got in." He tapped the guest log. "You've always been here." I turned to the woman. "We're leaving." She nodded quickly. "We're leaving." We took off down the hall, but the motel moved with us. The walls stretched. The lights flickered. The air grew thicker. like we were running through something alive. Doors opened on their own, revealing things that weren't human. Figures standing in the dark, their faces melting, their eyes watching. And then a room door swung open in front of us. Room 9. Our room. The one we had never left. Inside, the TV was on, playing static. The bed was made, and on the pillows were 2 perfect imprints, like someone had been lying there just seconds ago. I froze and my stomach dropped. The woman's breath hitched. "No." She turned to me, her eyes wide and hollow. "We're still in the bed." The words barely left her lips before the walls collapsed inward. The motel shrieked, the floor split open, and I saw something beneath it all. Endless rooms, endless hallways, a never-ending maze of twisting, shifting spaces. The truth hit me all at once. This wasn't a motel. It was a trap. A place that pulled people in, that made them forget, that kept them running forever, searching for a way out that never existed. The guests weren't people. They were the ones who stopped running. And now, we were becoming them. The last thing I heard was the manager's voice. Calm, smooth, final. Welcome home.